The chamber was hushed. All eyes were on the former president. Trump, back in the spotlight for his address to Congress. He began to speak, his words echoing in the packed room. Then, a sudden commotion. Representative Al Green, a Democrat from Texas, rose from his seat. He was shaking his cane, his voice booming across the chamber. It was a stunning moment. Green was furious. Green's anger was palpable. He shouted, his words cutting through the stunned silence. His target? Trump's proposed budget cuts. Cuts that would gut Medicaid, leaving millions vulnerable. Green saw it as an attack on the most vulnerable. He refused to stay silent. Speaker Mike Johnson, a Republican, tried to restore order. He banged his gavel, demanding silence. But Green was undeterred. He continued to shout, his voice filled with passion and indignation. Security approached Green, their faces grim. They escorted him out of the chamber, his voice fading as he left. The drama was far from over. Green's outburst was like a spark. It ignited a powder keg of frustration and anger. The Democrats, already on edge, were now fired up. The Republicans, meanwhile, were visibly shaken. This was not how they had envisioned the night unfolding. Green's outburst was just the beginning. Across the chamber, Democrats were making their voices heard. Some held up signs, their messages stark and uncompromising. Others wore pins and buttons, silent but powerful symbols of their dissent. The room was a sea of protest. The Democratic Women's Caucus made a statement with their attire. They were all dressed in pink, a symbol of protest against Trump's policies. Policies they saw as harmful to women and families. This wasn't just about Medicaid anymore. This was about a fundamental clash of values. Blue and yellow were also on display. Some Democrats sported these colors in a show of solidarity with Ukraine. The message was clear. They stood with Ukraine against what they saw as Russian aggression, and they wanted to remind everyone that Trump's foreign policy was still a point of contention. But the protests weren't limited to clothing and signs. Representative Rashida Tlaib held up a whiteboard. On it, a simple but powerful message: "That's a lie." This act of defiance drew gasps and cheers. The tension in the room was thicker than ever. Democratic leaders watched with a mix of anxiety and pride. They had urged their members to maintain decorum, to focus on policy, not spectacle. But they also understood the raw emotions driving the protests. The party was deeply divided on how to handle Trump's return to the spotlight. The Republicans, meanwhile, were fuming. They accused the Democrats of grandstanding, of disrespecting the former president and the sanctity of the House chamber. The chasm between the two parties had never seemed wider. Adding fuel to the fire was Elon Musk. The tech mogul, a vocal critic of Social Security, had become a target for Democrats. They saw him as a symbol of the wealthy elite, benefiting from a system they were trying to dismantle. Stickers with the words, "Elon Musk steals Social Security," appeared on laptops and jackets. A silent but pointed jab at Musk and his allies. The events of that night painted a stark picture. Congress was a battleground. Trust was shattered. The fight for the soul of America was playing out in real time, under the watchful eyes of the world. The fallout from that night was immediate and intense. Cable news channels exploded with debates. Social media became a war zone of accusations and counter-accusations. The country was more divided than ever. Green's actions sparked a nationwide debate. Was he a hero, or was he a villain? His supporters praised his courage. They argued that drastic times called for drastic measures. His detractors condemned his behavior. They called it an assault on democracy. One thing was certain: the events of that night would have lasting consequences. They exposed the raw nerves of a nation grappling with its identity. They showed the world that American democracy was in a state of crisis, and they left everyone wondering what happens next. The answer, like so much else in American politics these days, was far from clear. But one thing was certain: the fight was far from over.